when you look at not just these three races in the round of 10, but like I mentioned, IRP and Richmond to lead into the playoffs, a pair of fifth-place finishes there, then back-to-back wins, and now a second-place run here this weekend at Kansas. So, Brandon, the thing that comes to mind for me is Tony Stewart in 2006 when he missed the chase as the defending champion. Obviously, a different situation here with Layne Riggs being a Truck Series rookie. But when Tony Stewart got to the final 10 races of the year, even though he was not competing for a championship, he won 3 races in the chase and looked to be, if he had been in the chase, like he would be a strong contender to defend his title. Is there any other scenario that you can think of that resembles what Layne Riggs is doing right now?
I mean, I guess that's the biggest one there. It's difficult to think of anything else that comes close to this, where it's someone who's in the rest of the field that is just all of a sudden coming to light at the end, where it doesn't matter anymore for them. But I mean, just ask Layne Riggs and Front Row Motorsports if it still matters. I mean, they're on a tear right now, and Talladega, of course, is more of a crapshoot, so we don't can't say he's a lock for it. But I mean, going into Homestead, he's got a good shot. I mean, and Martinsville is probably his best shot, and then coming into Phoenix, he could very well take the championship fight, the spotlight away from the championship 4. He's really lighting up here at the end, and it just shows, like Tony Stewart in 06, it shows that there's no winning still trumps whatever playoff format, whatever chase, whatever round of whatever you've got going on, whatever storyline you're trying to build. In racing, winning is what what is the major prize, and that they say that with that's also a part of the playoffs. Win and you're in. That's a big selling point for it. But also just someone. We'll get to someone else later, but winning after to solidify your career, to keep your career moving. That's always going to be a storyline, no matter what you do to your standings, to your playoff format, what have you.
Layne Riggs could absolutely be a threat to win Talladega, Brandon, like you mentioned. And, I think, like I said, I think Tony Stewart is the obvious comparison here. I can't think of anything off the top of my head that, resembles a consistent run like this that he's been on. I can think of one-offs like Dale Jr. winning at Martinsville in 2014 after he had been eliminated. But, in terms of somebody who's not a championship contender being so consistently great in this final stretch here. And, it does kind of make you wonder, well, if he were in the playoffs, I guess he would be a championship contender and he'd be up there fighting for it. But I feel like the fact that it comes back to that conversation so much is just another reason why this system is so exhausting to me. Because, and Brock Beard, my editor-in-chief over at lastcar.info, to his credit, brought this up on his stream last night after the Cup race, because Ross Chastain spoiled the playoff party on the Cup side of things yesterday. And Marty Schneider's asking in that front stretch interview, like, well, Ross, don't you wish you were in the playoffs? And if you'd been in the playoffs, maybe you'd be on your way to the round of 8 now. And don't you wish you were in the playoffs last year when you won at Phoenix? And, don't you wish you'd won at Phoenix in 2022 when you were in the championship 4? I mean, it's just all these conversations come back. Maybe it wasn't that extreme. I'd have to go back and rewatch Marty's interview, but I know that the conversation certainly came up because Ross's answer in response to that was, I'm just trying to win a Cup race. It's the NASCAR Cup Series. I'm still out here along.
It's hard to do this.
Up to 39 other guys trying to all accomplish the same goal, and that's parking in victory lane in a NASCAR Cup Series race. And it doesn't matter that I'm not in the postseason or championship eligible or trying to lock my spot up in the round of 8 here. I'm just trying to win a race. And I guess for me, again, and Brandon, we talked about this a little bit before we came on the air, it's another reason why I just have such a hard time reconciling this system and how we crown a champion with the sport of auto racing here. People who defend this system will sometimes say, well, name another major sporting league that doesn't have some sort of a postseason or some sort of a playoff. And I guess my counter to that would be, okay, if you, I mean, first of all, I can do that with like the Premier League and stuff like that, but that's beside the point. But the question that I would follow up with is basically, can you show me another sporting league or organization that has some sort of a playoff system that has the non-playoff teams and non-playoff competitors out there at the same time trying to accomplish the same goal as everybody else in the playoffs?
That's also unique. That's also a storyline worth following.
Well, but it all comes back to the playoffs anyway, because then you ask Ross, well, don't you wish you were in the playoffs? I mean, that's just
again.
That's
a silly question. I'm sorry, it's just a silly question.
But why is it a silly question? I don't know.
No, the silly question to ask Ross, like,
sure, okay.
About not your question. I mean, asking Ross that sort of question after he just got out of the car to park it in victory lane. Well, not yet, but he's going to. But yeah, that to me, Ben, that question by Marty Schneider, and he's wonderful at his job. That was the whole theme for me of Sunday was why is this still our focus again? Like, do you realize what he just did? Like, I mean that's just not that shouldn't be the main focus. Whenever you have a non-playoff driver spoil the party, like that's not spoiling the party. That's adding to the season's history. And he's coming back after his win last year in Nashville, and has not been able to be in victory lane since then. And now Trackhouse Racing has both of their drivers in victory lane for the year. Those are your storylines whenever you don't have a playoff driver win. It's not, darn, don't you wish you would have done this a few weeks ago? Like, yeah, that's a part of it, but like, it's almost like a political push. It's not in the world of politics, but like wanting the playoffs to be the story is almost like a campaign, election campaign of like, I have to keep hammering it home. It's involved in every facet of the event now. Every facet of the broadcast. Like, does it really have to be that way?
Yeah, and again, I know we don't usually cover Cup on this show, but there was a lot that happened, towards the end of the race and played out. Again, creating this similar storyline to like what we have right now with Layne Riggs going on in the Truck Series. Like, don't you wish you were in the playoffs? And Chase Briscoe is in the playoffs. And he made a move that our own Joe Samaniego said on a wrap-up show last night that he saw no issue with, because, that this is the system that we have, and Briscoe is still fighting for his playoff life and had to be aggressive and try not to go a lap down. And he left barely a car width's worth of space for Kyle Busch. Busch ended up getting loose and hit the wall and ended up falling back in the results. But again, for all the talk that Kyle Busch has about trying to keep his streak alive, it's a much smaller streak, but Ross Chastain is trying to keep a streak of at least 1 year alive, right? Because he won a couple races in 22 and in 23, and he hadn't won yet this year. So, that should be part of a storyline too. Like, Brandon, like you mentioned, Suarez getting his win and Trackhouse getting both of their cars into victory lane by the end of the year. I mean, less than half the field, even at its peak, even when we have the full field of 16, a majority of the cars out there are not competing for a championship. They're not in the playoffs. There are storylines out there that are worth bringing up during a broadcast or during, the Newsweek or in the media center just as much as the playoff stories are. And yet everything is so heavily centered around the playoffs. NBC constantly has, the points as they run on the TV screen, on the pylon. It's inescapable. And again, I can't fault NBC for doing it because, people that are really invested in the system and numbers and stats guys, they want to track all that. They want to see that. That's fine. But it's just, it's a constant reminder that everything this time of year centers around one thing, and that is the system. And it's why, again, the example I always think of is when Bubba Wallace was still driving the Petty car, and he was in the midst of a miserable season in 2019, and then just seemingly out of nowhere has all this speed at Indianapolis, a crown jewel race, the Brickyard 400, finishes third. But that was when Indianapolis was the final race before the playoffs began. So they got to pretty much all 16 drivers that had locked themselves in. And then on the NASCAR America post-race show, like 90 minutes later, oh yeah, by the way, Bubba Wallace finished third today. Let's go hear what he had to say about his fantastic result here. And it's like that should be a storyline that gets prioritized well before 90 minutes into the post race show. I feel like so,
Yeah,
but he wasn't in the playoffs, so it doesn't matter in that sense.
Yeah, I'm not on Grid Live wrap up, so I feel like I have more liberty to talk a little more about Cup. I mean, the two main stories of yesterday had nothing to do with the playoffs. Kyle Busch almost having making his, what is it going to be, 20 years in a row?
If he can get one before the year ends,
where he has a win. That dream crushed for another weekend after almost near solidifying it, and Ross Chastain snapping a little smaller winless streak. But you know, those are your storylines, and anything else was set. If anything distracts you from that, it's because you were in a board meeting that told you that you can't focus on anything but the playoffs.